Have you ever watched a story that slowly pulls you in, and before you even realize it, you're completely lost inside its world? King Kong is one of those films that doesn't just entertain, it makes you feel every moment. From the very beginning, the movie builds a sense of mystery and tension, where every scene carries meaning and every character hides something deeper beneath the surface. As the story unfolds, you start to see how small decisions lead to unexpected consequences. The film takes you through intense moments, emotional turns, and powerful scenes that keep you hooked till the very end. It's not just about what happens, it's about why it happens and how it changes everything. The characters in this film are not simple. Each one has a purpose, a backstory, and a role that connects to the bigger picture. Their performances bring life to the story, making every scene feel real and impactful. But what truly makes King Kong stand out is the way it was created, the vision behind the story, the effort put into its production, and the ideas that inspired it. Every detail, from storytelling to execution, adds something unique to the overall experience. In this video, we're going to break down the complete story, explore the characters, and analyze everything from its creation to its success. And just to be clear, this is not a full movie or a movie screening. It's a detailed review and analysis made for learning and entertainment purposes. So let's begin and take a closer look at King Kong. As the story keeps moving forward, you start noticing that the film is not just building scale, it is building emotional pressure at the same time, and this is where it becomes more than just an adventure story because every scene now carries weight that connects back to the characters instead of just the situation, especially when and Kong spend more time together and their connection starts becoming clearer, not through dialogue but through behavior, through silence, through reactions. And that is what makes these moments strong because the film does not explain anything, it lets you understand it on your own, and at the same time the rescue team is going deeper into the island where everything becomes more dangerous, not in a random way but in a constant way, where every step feels like a risk and every movement feels like it could lead to something unexpected. And this is where the film uses its environment in a very controlled way because the island is not just a background, it is actively shaping what is happening, forcing the characters to react instead of act freely, and that creates a natural tension that stays consistent without needing sudden shocks or forced drama. And while all this is happening, Carl's obsession becomes even more visible because now he is not just interested in capturing something unique, he is fully committed to the idea of controlling it, and that shift is important because it changes how you see his actions. They are no longer driven by creativity, they are driven by control, and that creates a contrast between him and the others who are simply trying to survive and protect each other, and this contrast keeps the story grounded even when the scale becomes larger, and when Kong faces other creatures to protect, and those scenes are not just action sequences, they are built on purpose, every movement has intention, every reaction has meaning, and that is why they feel engaging instead of repetitive, because you are not just watching a fight, you are watching a relationship being tested in a dangerous environment. And at the same time Jack's journey continues in a way that feels focused, he is not distracted by everything happening around him, his direction is clear, and that clarity helps the story maintain its flow without unnecessary detours. And when the group faces the insect pit sequence, the film shifts into a darker tone without changing its identity, because the fear here is different, it is not fast, it is slow and uncomfortable, and that difference adds variation to the experience without breaking the consistency, and as the survivors come out of that situation, you can feel that the story is now moving towards something bigger, not just in terms of action but in terms of consequence, because everything that has happened so far is starting to connect, and the moment Kong is finally brought down is not treated like a victory, it feels like a turning point where something important is lost. And that feeling stays with you as the story transitions into the city, because now the environment changes completely but the emotional tension does not disappear, it simply takes a different form, and you start realizing that the real conflict is no longer between humans and the island, it is between control and freedom, and that shift is what gives the film its deeper layer without needing to explain it directly, and from this point forward, everything feels more focused, more direct. Because the story is no longer building, it is preparing to resolve everything it has set up so far. As the story shifts into the city, the entire atmosphere changes but the tension does not drop, it transforms into something quieter and more controlled. And this is where the film becomes more uncomfortable in a different way, because the danger is no longer wild or unpredictable like the island. It is organized and intentional. And you start seeing how easily something powerful can be reduced when it is placed in an environment designed to control it. And Kong is no longer moving freely, he is displayed, contained, and turned into something people can look at instead of something they need to understand. And this shift feels heavy because you have already seen what he is capable of and what he represents, so watching him in chains creates a different kind of tension that does not rely on action, it relies on contrast. And at the same time, Anne's presence becomes even more important because she is the only connection between Kong and anything real, and when she is removed from that space, everything begins to break down in a very natural way, not because something sudden happens, but because the situation itself was never stable to begin with, and when Kong finally reacts, it does not feel random, it feels inevitable, like something that was always going to happen once the pressure reached a certain point, and that makes the chaos that follows feel justified instead of exaggerated. And as he moves through the city searching for N, the scale of the film increases again. But the focus remains personal, because every movement he makes has a purpose, and that purpose keeps the scenes grounded even when they become large in scale, and the destruction around him does not feel like the main event. It feels like a result of something deeper, and when he finally finds N again, the tone shifts once more, becoming calmer even in the middle of chaos. And that contrast is what gives the scene its impact, because everything slows down without actually stopping, and you can feel that the story is reaching its final stage without needing to rush. And when they reach the top of the building, the film removes almost all distractions and focuses only on the moment. And this is where everything comes together without explanation, because you already understand what each character represents and what they have gone through, and the arrival of the planes does not feel like a sudden threat. It feels like the final step in a process that has been building since the moment Kong was taken from the island, and the way the sequence plays out stays consistent with the tone of the film. It does not try to create unnecessary drama, it simply allows the situation to unfold in a direct way, and when Kong falls, the impact comes from everything that led to that moment rather than the moment itself, and that is why it stays with you, because it feels complete, not because it is loud but because it is final, and when the story ends, it does not try to extend the emotion or explain it further, it leaves you with a clear understanding of what happened and why it happened, and that clarity is what gives the film its lasting effect, because it respects the audience enough to let them process the ending on their own without forcing a reaction. As everything settles after the ending, the film leaves you with a very clear sense of what it was trying to do, and this is where the overall experience becomes easier to understand, because you are no longer following the story, you are reflecting on how it was told. And one of the strongest things about King Kong is how it controls its pacing without losing direction. Even though the runtime is long, it does not feel random or stretched without purpose. Every section has a role. The beginning builds emotional grounding, the island builds tension and scale, and the city brings everything back into a focused and controlled conclusion. And this structure helps the film stay connected from start to finish without feeling scattered. And at the same time, the performances play a major role in keeping the story believable, especially the way Anne is presented, because her character is not exaggerated or overly dramatic. She reacts in a way that feels natural, and that helps the audience stay connected to her even in the most unrealistic situations. And Carl's character adds another layer because he represents ambition without limits. And the film does not try to justify him or fully criticize him, it simply shows his actions and lets you understand the consequences, and that approach keeps the story grounded even when the scale becomes large. And the visual side of the film also deserves attention, because it is not just about creating big moments, it is about creating a consistent world where everything feels connected. The island feels dangerous but alive, the city feels controlled but restrictive, and that contrast adds depth without needing explanation. And even though the effects show the age of the film in some places, the intention behind them remains clear, which is more important than perfection, and the sound design and music also support the experience without taking control of it. They guide the emotion instead of forcing it, and that balance helps the film maintain its tone from beginning to end. And at the same time, the film does have some limitations that become noticeable, especially in certain sections where scenes run longer than necessary, not because they are weak but because they repeat the same idea for a little too long, and that affects the rhythm slightly, especially for viewers who expect a faster pace. And there are also moments where the film focuses more on scale than progression, which slows the momentum without adding new information, and while these moments do not break the experience, they make the length more noticeable. And another point is that the film does not rely on surprise, it follows a very clear path, and while that makes it easy to follow, it also reduces unpredictability. You understand where things are heading even before they fully happen, and this is not necessarily a flaw, but it does affect how engaging certain parts feel. And despite these points, the film remains consistent in its tone, does not lose its identity or try to become something else, and that consistency is one of its biggest strengths because it allows the story to feel complete instead of fragmented, and by the time you look back at the entire experience, it feels like a story that was carefully built rather than quickly assembled, and that difference is what makes it stand out even with its imperfections. As the experience continues, the film keeps pulling you deeper into its world without giving you a clear stopping point, and that is where its control becomes more noticeable because even when a scene feels complete, it does not feel like a break, it feels like a transition into the next layer, and this is especially clear in how the film handles its emotional tone, because it never isolates emotion into one moment, it spreads it across multiple scenes so that it grows gradually instead of hitting suddenly, and this approach makes the connection with the characters feel more natural, especially with and because her journey is not defined by one big moment, it is built through small reactions that keep adding up, and at the same time Kong's presence continues to feel consistent, not just as a powerful figure but as something that reacts to its environment rather than dominating it completely, and this balance between strength and vulnerability is what keeps his character engaging throughout the film. And as the narrative keeps moving, you also start noticing how the film avoids unnecessary distractions. It does not introduce random elements just to increase scale. Everything that appears has a purpose, even if that purpose is simply to maintain the tone or build atmosphere, and this controlled approach helps the film stay focused even when the visuals become large, and the way the camera follows the action also supports this because it does not try to overwhelm you with movement. It allows you to understand what is happening clearly before shifting to the next moment, and this clarity plays a big role in maintaining engagement over a long runtime, because confusion would have easily broken the flow, and instead the film keeps everything readable, even in its most intense sequences. And another important detail is how the film uses contrast not just in locations but in pacing. Some moments move quickly to create urgency, while others slow down to let the weight of the situation settle, and this variation prevents the experience from becoming repetitive, even when the overall structure remains consistent. And as all these elements continue to connect, the film keeps building a sense of progression that feels steady rather than forced. You are not pushed from one moment to another, you are carried through it, and that difference is what keeps the flow smooth without needing artificial transitions or repeated explanations. As the narrative keeps unfolding without any pause, the deeper layer of the film starts becoming clearer, not because it explains itself but because the behavior of the characters begins to reveal patterns that stay consistent across different situations. And this is where you start noticing that the story is not only about events, it is about choices and the consequences that follow those choices, especially when you look at Carl, because his decisions are not sudden, they build gradually from the beginning, and every step he takes feels connected to the previous one, which makes his actions believable even when they become extreme. And this kind of progression adds weight to the story because nothing feels random, everything feels like a result of something that was already set in motion, and at the same time Anne's role continues to evolve in a way that feels quiet but important. She is not driving the plot through action, she is shaping it through presence, and that difference makes her character stand out because she influences the direction of events without needing control over them, and this becomes even more noticeable in her connection with Kong, where communication happens without words, and that choice by the film makes those moments feel more real because they rely on understanding rather than explanation. And as this relationship develops, the film creates a contrast between instinct and intention. Kong reacts based on instinct but shows signs of understanding, while the humans act with intention but often ignore understanding, and this contrast keeps building throughout the story without being stated directly, and it adds a layer that you only fully notice when you start connecting the scenes together. And the film also uses isolation as a recurring idea, not just in physical spaces like the island or the city, but in how characters are separated from each other emotionally, even when they are in the same place. And this isolation creates tension that does not rely on action. It comes from distance, from the lack of connection, and when that connection appears, even briefly, it feels significant. And this is why certain moments stand out without needing to be louder or larger, because they carry meaning that has been building over time. And another detail that becomes clearer is how the film treats control as something unstable. Every attempt to control a situation leads to a new problem instead of a solution, and this pattern repeats in different ways, from the island to the city, showing that control without understanding does not last. And this idea ties back into the structure of the story, where each section reflects a different version of that same concept. And as all these elements continue to connect, the film maintains its flow without breaking into separate pieces, because every layer is built on top of the previous one. And that is what keeps the experience continuous. You are not moving between different parts. You are moving through a single line that keeps expanding as it goes forward. As the film continues to expand without breaking its flow, the technical side starts becoming more visible in a way that supports the story instead of taking attention away from it. And this is where you begin to notice how carefully each scene is constructed, because nothing feels random in terms of placement or movement. The camera does not simply follow action, it guides your focus with intention. And this becomes clear in moments where large-scale sequences are happening but your attention is always directed toward a specific emotional point, usually tied to a character rather than the event itself. And that choice keeps the film from becoming visually overwhelming, even when the environment is filled with movement. And at the same time, the editing plays a key role in maintaining continuity, because the transitions between scenes do not feel like cuts, they feel like extensions of the same moment. And this is achieved by carrying forward either motion or emotion so that the viewer never feels disconnected from what was happening before. And this approach is especially important in a film with this length, because without strong continuity the experience would feel fragmented, and instead it stays unified. And another detail that stands out is how the film balances scale and intimacy, because even when the visuals are large, the emotional focus remains narrow. It stays centered on a few key characters, and this prevents the story from losing its core, and as a result the audience does not feel like they are watching events from a distance. They feel involved in them, and this involvement is maintained through consistent perspective. The film rarely shifts its viewpoint in a way that would break immersion. It stays aligned with the characters, and this alignment helps build a stronger connection over time. And the use of sound also contributes to this effect, not by being loud or constant, but by being selective. Certain moments are allowed to breathe without heavy background noise, and that silence creates space for tension to build naturally, while other moments use sound to increase intensity without overpowering the scene. And this balance keeps the experience controlled. And as the story moves forward, the repetition of visual patterns becomes noticeable, not in a distracting way but in a way that reinforces meaning. Similar framing, similar movement, similar reactions, all of these elements appear again in different contexts, and this creates a sense of familiarity that strengthens the narrative without needing direct explanation. And this technique works because it connects different parts of the film through visual language rather than dialogue, and that keeps the flow smooth. And another important aspect is how the film manages viewer expectation. It sets a certain rhythm early on and then adjusts it gradually, so that changes do not feel sudden, they feel earned, and this prevents the audience from feeling disoriented even when the tone shifts. And as all these elements continue working together, the film maintains a steady progression that feels continuous, not because it avoids change, but because it integrates change into the same forward movement. And this is what keeps the experience consistent from one moment to the next without creating any sense of separation. As the flow keeps moving without any visible break, the way the film holds attention becomes more deliberate. Because it does not rely on constant action to keep you engaged, it controls interest by shifting focus at the right moments. And this is where storytelling psychology starts becoming clear. The film understands that attention drops when information becomes predictable. So it keeps adjusting what you are looking at without changing the direction of the story. Sometimes it pulls you closer to a character so you focus on emotion, and sometimes it pushes you slightly outward so you understand the situation, and this constant adjustment keeps the mind active, because you are not watching the same type of moment again and again, even if the setting remains similar. And another important detail is how the film spaces out its high-intensity sequences. It does not place them back to back. It allows a gap where the tension settles before building again, and this prevents fatigue, because continuous intensity reduces impact over time, and instead the film uses contrast to make strong moments feel stronger, and this pattern repeats in different forms, sometimes through action, sometimes through silence, sometimes through character interaction, and that variation keeps the rhythm alive. And at the same time, the film avoids over-explaining its plot. It trusts that the viewer can follow what is happening without constant guidance. And this trust increases engagement because it makes you pay attention instead of passively consuming the story, and you begin to anticipate what might happen next, not because the film tells you, but because it has already shown you enough to understand the pattern. And this anticipation is important because it creates involvement. You are no longer just watching events, you are thinking along with them. And another layer that becomes visible is how the film uses perspective to control emotional response. When it wants you to feel tension, it keeps the frame tight and focused, and when it wants you to understand scale, it opens the frame without losing clarity, and this shift in perspective guides how you react without needing to change the content of the scene. And as a result, the same type of situation can feel different depending on how it is presented, and this flexibility adds depth to the experience without complicating it. And the film also maintains a steady emotional line, even when scenes change quickly. Feeling carries forward so that you do not reset your reaction every time. Instead, you build on what you already felt, and this continuity is what keeps the flow smooth, because you are not starting over, you are continuing, and as all these elements keep working together, the film maintains control over your attention without forcing it. It does not demand focus, it earns it through structure, timing, and consistency, and that is what allows the experience to stay engaging over a long duration, without feeling repetitive or disconnected. As the flow continues without interruption, the deeper meaning begins to show through the way the same ideas appear in different forms across the story, and this is where the film starts working on a symbolic level without ever stopping to explain itself, because the island and the city are not just locations, they represent two different systems where one is driven by instinct and the other by control. And as the story moves between these spaces, you begin to see how the same actions lead to different outcomes depending on the environment. And this pattern builds quietly because the film does not point it out, it allows you to recognize it through repetition and contrast, and the character of Kong becomes central to this idea because he does not change in nature, but the way others react to him changes completely depending on where he is, and this shift reveals more about the people than it does about him. And at the same time, Anne's role connects both worlds in a way that feels consistent. She responds to situations based on understanding rather than fear, and this creates a contrast with the rest of the characters who are often reacting based on control or survival, and this difference is not presented as a statement, it is shown through behavior, and that is what gives it weight. And as the story continues, the idea of isolation appears again in different forms. On the island it is physical. Characters are separated by distance and environment, while in the city it becomes emotional. Characters are surrounded by people but still disconnected, and this shift changes how isolation feels without changing its function, and it continues to influence how characters make decisions. And another element that becomes clear is how the film treats spectacle as something temporary. Large moments appear and disappear, but the emotional impact remains. And this creates a contrast between what is seen and what is felt, because the visual scale may draw attention for a moment, but the meaning stays longer, and this is why certain scenes remain memorable even after the action ends. And the film also repeats the idea of control leading to consequence. Every attempt to dominate or contain something results in a reaction that cannot be managed, and this pattern is consistent from the beginning to the end, and it reinforces the central theme without needing direct explanation. And as all these symbolic layers continue to connect, the film maintains its continuous flow because each idea builds on the previous one instead of replacing it, and this creates a structure where meaning develops over time rather than appearing suddenly. and that is what keeps the experience cohesive, because nothing feels separate, everything feels like part of the same progression that continues forward without stopping. As the movement continues without pause, the film begins to tighten its grip on attention in a way that feels controlled rather than aggressive, and this is where you notice that the story is no longer building its foundation, it is reinforcing everything it has already established while pushing it forward at the same time, and this dual movement keeps the experience steady because you are not learning something completely new. You are seeing existing ideas evolve into stronger forms, and that evolution is what keeps engagement high without needing sudden shifts, and as you follow this progression, the behavior of the characters starts to feel more predictable in a good way, not because the film becomes repetitive, but because it has defined its patterns clearly, so when a character reacts, it feels consistent with what you already know about them, and this consistency builds trust between the story and the viewer, because you are no longer questioning the logic behind actions. You are understanding them as part of a larger pattern, and that allows the film to move faster without losing clarity, and at the same time the visual structure continues to support this movement by keeping focus on what matters in each moment. The frame does not try to show everything, it shows enough to guide your attention while leaving space for interpretation, and this balance prevents overload, especially in sequences where multiple elements are present, and instead of competing for attention, those elements work together to support a single direction, and this is where the film shows discipline in its construction, because it avoids unnecessary complexity even when the scale allows for it, and that restraint keeps the flow clean, and as the narrative moves deeper, the sense of inevitability becomes stronger, not in a way that reduces interest, but in a way that increases tension, because you begin to understand that certain outcomes are approaching, and the film does not try to hide that, it allows you to feel it building gradually, and this creates a different kind of engagement where you are not waiting to be surprised, you are watching how the story reaches a point you can already sense, and that anticipation becomes part of the experience, and another layer that becomes more visible is how the film connects physical movement with emotional direction. Characters are not just moving through space, they are moving toward or away from something that carries meaning, and this alignment between physical and emotional movement keeps scenes purposeful, because every action contributes to the overall progression, and at the same time the film continues to avoid unnecessary pauses. Even when a moment slows down, it still feels like it is moving forward, because something is always changing either in the situation or in the emotional state, and this constant sense of movement is what prevents the experience from feeling static, and as this flow continues, the film maintains its control over rhythm by balancing repetition and variation. It revisits familiar ideas but presents them in slightly different ways, and this keeps the narrative cohesive without becoming predictable, because you recognize the pattern but still remain interested in how it will be expressed next. And this is where the film's structure shows its strength. It does not depend on isolated highlights, it depends on continuous progression, where each moment builds on the previous one without breaking the chain, and that is what keeps the entire experience connected from start to finish, because nothing feels separate, everything feels like part of the same forward movement that does not stop or reset at any point. As the story continues moving forward, the focus stays tightly on how the situation keeps evolving without slowing down, and you start seeing that every action taken by the characters is now leading them deeper into consequences they can no longer control, especially when Kong's presence shifts from being something distant and unknown into something directly connected to the people around him. And this is where the tension stops being about discovery and becomes about what happens when two completely different worlds collide without understanding each other, and at the same time N's connection with Kong continues to grow in a way that feels natural because it is not forced through dialogue but shown through small interactions that slowly build trust. And this trust becomes important because it changes how you see Kong, not as a threat but as something that reacts based on how it is treated, and as this dynamic develops, the human side of the story starts revealing its own problems more clearly, especially through Carl, whose obsession is now fully visible as he focuses more on capturing Kong than understanding the situation, and this shift creates a contrast between survival and control where some characters are trying to get out safely while others are trying to gain something from the chaos. And as the group continues moving through dangerous situations on the island, every encounter feels connected to this larger conflict, not just random danger but part of an environment that does not allow mistakes, and this constant pressure keeps the story moving without needing artificial speed. And when Kong begins to actively protect and instead of simply carrying her, the relationship reaches a point where it directly influences the direction of events, because now the actions taken by Kong are no longer unpredictable, they are driven by a clear connection. And this changes how the scenes play out, especially when other characters get involved and try to interfere, because their actions are based on fear or ambition while Kong's actions are based on instinct and connection, and this difference creates situations where conflict feels unavoidable, and as the story keeps moving forward, all these elements start aligning in a way that makes the next phase feel inevitable rather than sudden, because everything has been building. As events continue moving ahead, the direction becomes sharper and every moment starts carrying clearer purpose, and you begin to notice that situations are no longer forming randomly but are now directly shaped by earlier decisions, especially when Kong's behavior shifts from simple reaction to intentional protection. And this change creates a strong emotional anchor because his actions now follow a pattern that makes sense rather than feeling unpredictable, while N's presence continues to influence that pattern in a subtle way, guiding his responses without control. And this connection adds depth because it develops quietly through interaction instead of explanation, and on the other side the human group becomes more divided in intent, where some are focused on escaping danger while others are driven by personal gain, and this difference creates friction that pushes the story forward naturally. And as the island environment keeps closing in with constant threats, every movement feels necessary rather than optional, and that urgency keeps the pacing active without forcing speed, and when attempts are made to overpower Kong, the outcome feels tied to misunderstanding rather than strength, because the conflict is not equal in awareness, and this imbalance shapes the direction of each encounter, making every outcome feel connected to intention instead of chance. And as the narrative keeps advancing, the path ahead feels increasingly unavoidable, not because it is predictable, but because every step taken so far has narrowed the possibilities, leading everything toward a point where control, instinct, and consequence will fully collide without any. As the journey continues without any pause, the shift from the island to the city happens in a way that feels natural but heavy at the same time, because once Kong is taken away from his environment, everything around him starts feeling wrong, not because something dramatic happens immediately but because the balance that existed on the island no longer exists here, and the people who brought him back are no longer reacting to danger. They are trying to control what they have captured, and this change creates a new kind of tension where the threat is not chaos but confinement, while N is separated from him and placed back into a world that looks familiar but does not feel the same anymore. And at the same time Carl moves forward with his plan, turning Kong into something that can be displayed rather than understood, preparing a public show where he presents him as something extraordinary without considering the consequences of forcing such a powerful being into a controlled space. And when Kong is finally revealed in front of an audience, everything that has been building begins to surface, because he does not respond the way they expect. The lights, the noise, and the unfamiliar environment create confusion that quickly turns into agitation, and without N there to calm him, his reactions become stronger, pulling against the chains that are meant to hold him, and the more they try to contain him, the more unstable the situation becomes, until control completely breaks. And he frees himself, turning the controlled environment into chaos in a matter of moments. And as he moves through the city, everything changes again, not because the environment is unfamiliar but because his purpose becomes clear. He is no longer reacting to threats, he is searching, moving through the streets with direction instead of randomness, and this makes every moment feel more focused, because even though destruction happens around him, it is not the center of what he is doing, it is simply a result of his movement, and as people try to stop him, using force instead of understanding, the situation escalates further, and the contrast between the controlled city and his uncontrolled presence becomes more visible, because the structures that once felt stable begin to break under pressure, and when he finally finds and the pace shifts slightly, not by slowing down completely but by changing the energy of the moment, where everything around them continues moving but their interaction becomes the center, showing that even in the middle of chaos, their connection remains consistent. And this connection drives what happens next as Kong tries to take her away from everything that threatens them, moving upward toward a place that feels isolated from the rest of the world. and as they reach the top, the story narrows again, focusing only on what is happening between them and the forces trying to stop them. And when the planes arrive, the final conflict begins not as a sudden event but as the last step in a sequence that has been building since the moment he was captured, and despite his strength, the outcome becomes unavoidable as he continues holding on while being attacked. And even in that moment his focus does not change, staying connected to and until the very end, where his strength finally gives out and he falls, bringing everything to a stop in a way that feels final without needing explanation, and the story does not extend beyond that moment. Allows the impact of what just happened to remain without adding anything unnecessary, keeping the flow intact from beginning to end. As the moment of impact settles into silence, the story continues without breaking its flow, carrying forward the weight of what has just happened as people gather around the fallen body, not fully understanding what they witnessed but reacting to the scale of it, while and remains connected to the moment in a way that feels deeper than the surroundings, standing still as everything around her moves. And Carl pushes through the crowd with a different kind of focus, looking not at the event but at the result of his own actions. And even though nothing is explained directly, the meaning of what has happened becomes clear through the way each character reacts, some seeing it as an end, others seeing it as a spectacle that has reached its conclusion, and without pausing, the story moves into what follows, showing how quickly everything begins to return to normal on the surface. The city continues functioning, people continue moving, and the space that was filled with chaos starts settling back into routine. But the impact of what took place does not disappear. It stays within the characters who were directly connected to it, especially and whose journey does not end with the fall but continues through the memory of everything she experienced. And this continuation does not need dramatic scenes to show its effect. It is carried through presence, through stillness, through the absence of what was there before. And as this emotional thread continues, the story keeps its structure intact, not restarting or shifting direction, but extending the same line it has been following, where every phase leads into the next without separation. And even as the focus moves away from the large-scale events, the narrative remains grounded in the same core idea, that actions driven by control lead to outcomes that cannot be undone. And this idea is not repeated through dialogue but through the natural progression of events that have already taken place. And as the environment returns to stability, the contrast between what is seen and what is felt becomes stronger, because everything appears normal again while the experience itself has left a permanent mark. And this is where the film maintains its continuity by not forcing closure. It allows the story to exist beyond its final moment, giving space for the viewer to process what has happened without interrupting the flow that carried the entire narrative from beginning to end. And as this final stretch continues, the sense of completion comes from progression rather than conclusion, because nothing is added to create an ending, everything that was needed has already happened, and the story simply reaches the point where there is nothing left to extend, leaving behind a continuous line of events that remain connected. As the story continues to move forward without any pause, the focus stays on how the aftermath slowly blends into everyday life, and you begin to notice that nothing dramatic is added to explain what has already happened, because everything important has already been shown through actions, and this allows the narrative to keep its natural flow instead of forcing extra moments. While the city returns to its routine, the emotional weight stays with the characters who were directly involved, especially and whose presence now carries a quiet change that reflects everything she experienced. And this change is not shown through dialogue or explanation but through the way she exists within the same world that once felt normal. And at the same time, Carl's role becomes clearer in retrospect, not through new scenes but through the understanding of his decisions and their consequences, because every step he took led directly to this outcome. And this realization does not need to be spoken. It is already built into the progression of the story, and as the narrative continues, the connection between earlier events and the present moment remains intact, showing that nothing was isolated or accidental, everything followed a consistent path, and this consistency keeps the experience connected even after the main events have passed. And as the flow carries on, the absence of Kong becomes just as important as his presence was before, because the space he occupied is now empty, and that absence highlights the impact of what has been lost without needing to show it again. And the story does not shift away from this idea. It continues holding on to it as it moves forward, allowing the viewer to stay within the same emotional line that has been built from the beginning, and this is what keeps the narrative from feeling like it has ended abruptly, because it does not stop. It simply continues until there is nothing more to add, maintaining the same direction and tone. As the flow keeps moving without interruption, the film continues carrying that same emotional line forward, and you start noticing that even without new events being introduced, the story still feels active because the impact of everything that happened is still unfolding in a quiet way, and this is where the narrative relies on presence instead of action, because nothing needs to be added to push it forward. The progression now comes from what has already been set in motion, and as the environment fully settles back into routine, the contrast becomes clearer between what the world looks like and what has actually changed within it. Because on the surface everything appears normal again, yet the experience has left a mark that cannot be reversed, and this difference is what keeps the story connected even in its calmest moments. And as you stay within this flow, the absence of Kong continues to define the space more than his presence once did, because now every element that remains feels slightly different without him, and this shift does not need explanation. It is understood through the change in tone, and at the same time the characters carry forward their own outcomes, not through dramatic reactions but through subtle continuation, where their journey does not reset, it simply moves ahead from where it ended, and this is what prevents the narrative from feeling divided, because there is no clear separation between the main events and what follows. It all exists as part of the same movement, and as this movement continues, the film maintains its structure by not introducing anything unnecessary. It allows the story to reach a point where progression naturally slows without losing direction, and this controlled slowdown gives space for everything to settle without breaking the flow, and as a result the experience remains continuous, from the very first moment to the last, without any sudden shift that would separate the ending from the rest of the story. And this is what keeps the entire narrative. The movement stays steady and connected, and what becomes clear is that the narrative does not depend on new events to keep going, it depends on the weight of everything that has already happened, and this is where the experience starts feeling deeper because you are no longer following actions, you are following the impact those actions have left behind, and the city that once reacted with chaos now returns to its normal rhythm. People move forward, routines resume, and everything looks unchanged on the surface, yet the shift that took place cannot be undone, and this contrast creates a quiet tension that stays present even without visible conflict, and remains at the center of that shift because her journey does not reset, she carries forward everything she experienced, and that changes how she fits into the same world she started in, and this continuation feels natural because it does not rely on explanation, it is shown through the way she exists within the space around her, and at the same time the consequences of Carl's decisions remain part of the story without needing to be revisited directly, because the outcome already reflects every choice he made, and this connection between action and result keeps the narrative grounded even after the main events have passed, and as the flow continues, the absence of Kong becomes more noticeable in a subtle way, not through repeated reminders but through the space he once filled, because everything that surrounded him now exists without that presence, and this absence carries its own weight, shaping the tone without needing to add anything new, and as the story moves forward, it does not create a separate ending, it allows the same line to continue until it naturally reaches a point where there is nothing left to extend, and this is what keeps the structure intact, because the narrative does not break into parts. It remains a single progression that carries through from beginning to end, and even as the pace becomes calmer, the direction does not change, it stays aligned with everything that has been built, allowing the viewer to remain connected without needing a shift in focus, and as a result the experience feels complete not because something new is added at the end, but because everything that needed to happen has already taken place, and the story simply follows through on that progression without interruption, maintaining the same tone, the same direction, and the same flow all the way through, and as you stay within this final stretch, you can feel that the narrative is no longer building toward something, it is settling into what has already been achieved, and that settling happens gradually, without forcing closure, allowing each moment to carry forward naturally until the progression reaches its. As the story continues moving forward without any interruption, the focus remains on how everything that has already happened continues shaping what comes next. And you begin to see that the narrative does not need new events to stay active because the consequences of earlier actions are still unfolding in a steady and connected way. And this is where the experience becomes more grounded because instead of relying on constant movement or sudden danger, the film allows the impact of what has taken place to carry the progression, and the city that once reacted with panic now settles into its usual rhythm. People return to their routines, streets regain their structure, and everything appears stable again, yet that stability feels different because something significant has already disrupted it. And even though the environment looks the same, the meaning attached to it has changed, and this change is not explained directly, it is understood through the contrast between what the world shows and what the characters carry within themselves, and remains at the center of this shift because her journey has taken her through experiences that cannot be undone. And as she continues moving through the same spaces she once knew, there is a clear difference in how she exists within them, not through visible expression but through presence. And this subtle continuation adds depth to the story because it shows that events do not end when the action stops. They continue through the people who experience them, and at the same time the consequences of Carl's actions remain embedded in the narrative without needing to revisit his decisions directly, because everything that happened has already reflected the direction he chose, and this connection between choice and outcome keeps the story grounded even in its quieter moments. And as the flow continues, the absence of Kong becomes more significant with each passing moment, not because the film constantly reminds you of him, but because the space he occupied now feels different without him, and this absence is felt through the environment, through the reactions that no longer occur, through the silence where there was once movement, and this creates a sense of loss that does not rely on repetition, it exists naturally within the progression, and as the narrative carries forward, it does not attempt to rebuild tension or introduce new conflict. It remains focused on the line it has been following from the beginning, allowing each moment to connect directly to the next without creating a break in direction. And this is what keeps the experience continuous because there is no separation between phases, everything exists as part of the same movement, and even as the pace becomes calmer, the story does not lose its structure, it simply adjusts its rhythm to match the state it has reached. And this adjustment feels natural because it is based on progression rather than change, and as a result the viewer remains connected without needing a shift in focus, and the narrative continues moving forward in a way that feels steady and controlled, carrying the weight of everything that has already happened without adding unnecessary elements. And this is where the film shows its discipline because it understands that the story has already delivered its core, and instead of extending beyond that, it allows the progression to continue until it naturally reaches its limit. And this limit does not feel like an ending, it feels like a point where there is nothing left to expand, and that is what gives the experience its completeness, because it has followed a consistent path from the very beginning, and it continues on that path without interruption, maintaining the same tone, the same direction, and the same connection between every moment. And as this final stretch carries on, the story remains focused on continuity rather than conclusion, allowing the viewer to stay within the same emotional and narrative line without forcing closure. And this approach keeps the flow intact from start to finish, ensuring that the experience feels like one continuous progression rather than separate parts. And as everything settles into place, the story does not stop. It simply reaches a state where further movement is no longer necessary, leaving behind a complete line of events that remain. As the narrative keeps moving without any visible break, the story continues holding onto the same line it has built from the beginning, and what becomes clearer now is how every element that was introduced earlier continues to exist in a connected way rather than fading out. And this is where the experience feels complete in structure but still active in progression, because even though no new conflict is introduced, the impact of what has already taken place continues shaping the direction. And the environment that once reacted strongly now settles into a stable state, yet that stability carries a quiet difference that cannot be ignored. And this difference is not presented through dramatic moments but through the way everything continues as if nothing happened while still holding the memory of what did, and remains the central point of that continuity, because her journey has carried through every phase of the story without breaking. And now as she exists in a space that once felt familiar, her presence reflects a shift that is not spoken but understood, and this understanding connects directly back to everything she experienced, keeping the narrative tied together without needing to revisit earlier events. And at the same time, the consequences of Carl's actions remain embedded in the story as part of its structure, not as something that needs to be repeated but as something that has already defined the outcome. And this connection between cause and result keeps the flow grounded even in its quietest moments. And as the progression continues, the absence of Kong becomes a constant presence in itself, shaping the tone without needing attention, because the space that once held movement now holds stillness. And that stillness carries meaning that continues to influence the narrative without introducing anything new. And this is where the film maintains its continuity, by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the story instead of closing it off. And as a result, the experience does not shift into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same path until it reaches a natural point where no further expansion is required. And this point does not feel forced, it feels earned through progression, because every moment has contributed to reaching it. And as the story carries forward in this steady way, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts of the narrative stays unbroken, allowing the entire experience to exist as a single continuous line that does not divide itself into separate sections. And this is what keeps the flow smooth from beginning to end, because there is no reset, no restart, only continuation. And even as the pace becomes calmer, the direction does not change, it stays aligned with everything that has been built, allowing the viewer to remain engaged without needing a shift in focus. And as this final stretch continues, the narrative does not try to create additional impact. It allows the existing impact to remain, carrying it forward naturally, until the progression reaches its limit without breaking its continuity. And that is where the story remains, not as something that ends suddenly, but as something that completes its movement without interruption, holding together every element it introduced from the beginning. As the narrative continues without any pause, the flow stays aligned with everything that has already been built, and the story keeps moving forward in a way that feels steady rather than forced, because nothing new is being added to change its direction. Instead, the progression comes from how earlier events continue shaping the present, and this is where the experience feels complete in structure while still active in movement, because even though the major actions have already taken place, their impact remains present and continues to define the tone. And the environment that once reacted with chaos now holds a controlled calm that feels different from the beginning, not because it has changed on the surface but because the meaning attached to it has shifted. And this shift is carried through the characters who experienced everything directly, especially Anne, whose journey does not stop at the moment of loss but continues through the way she exists within the same world she started in. And this continuation is shown without explanation, through presence and stillness, allowing the viewer to understand the change without being told. And at the same time, the consequences of every decision remain connected to the outcome, not as a separate reflection but as part of the same line of progression that has been moving forward from the start. And this connection keeps the narrative grounded because nothing feels isolated or disconnected. Every moment remains tied to what came before it. And as the story carries on, the absence of Kong continues shaping the space in a subtle but constant way, because the energy that once filled the environment is no longer there, and that absence creates a contrast that stays present without needing attention. And this is what allows the story to maintain its emotional continuity even without active events, because the feeling does not reset, it carries forward. And as a result, the viewer remains connected without needing a new direction, and the narrative continues following the same path until it naturally reaches a point where there is nothing left to expand. And this point does not feel like a sudden ending, it feels like a gradual settling where every element has already reached its place. And as this settling continues, the structure of the story remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the flow remains unbroken, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous progression from beginning to end, without dividing itself into separate parts. And this is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it. It relies on the consistency of everything that came before. And as the movement carries forward in this steady way, the story reaches its limit naturally, holding together every element it introduced without needing to extend beyond what has already been achieved. As the narrative keeps moving in the same uninterrupted line, the continuation now holds onto the final moments that have already unfolded and allows their impact to spread across everything that remains. And this is where the story stays active without adding new events, because the weight of what has happened continues shaping how the world feels. And you begin to notice that even though the environment appears to return to its normal structure, the sense of normalcy is no longer the same as it was before, and this change is not highlighted through obvious signals. It exists quietly within the tone, within the way spaces feel emptier, within the absence of something that once carried presence, and this absence becomes a defining part of the continuation, because it influences how every remaining moment is experienced without needing to be directly addressed. And as the story carries forward, the connection between all earlier phases remains intact. Nothing is removed or separated. Everything continues to exist within the same flow, and this is what prevents the narrative from feeling divided. Because even now it is still following the same direction it started with, allowing each moment to connect naturally to the next, and Anne's presence continues to carry that connection in a way that feels grounded, because her journey has moved through every stage of the story without breaking. And now, as she remains within a world that has returned to stability, her existence reflects everything that has changed beneath that surface. And this reflection does not need to be expressed through words. It is understood through stillness, through the absence of reaction, through the way she holds onto what has already taken place without needing to revisit it. And at the same time, the consequences of Carl's ambition remain part of the structure of the story, not as something that needs to be repeated, but as something that has already defined the path, and this path continues forward without adjustment, because there is no space left to change what has already been set in motion. And as the progression continues, the city that once struggled to contain something beyond its control now exists in a state where control has been restored, yet that restoration carries the trace of what it could not hold, and this trace remains present in a subtle way, shaping the tone without becoming the focus. And this is where the narrative maintains its continuity, because it allows the impact to remain active instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not create a separate ending. It continues following the same line until it reaches a point where further movement is no longer required, and this point is reached gradually, through progression rather than interruption, because nothing shifts suddenly, everything settles into place over time, and as this settling continues, the emotional thread remains connected, the structure remains intact, and the flow remains unbroken, allowing the experience to stay unified from beginning to end. And this unity is what gives the narrative its strength, because it does not rely on individual moments to stand out, it relies on the connection between all moments to carry meaning. And as you remain within this final stretch, you can feel that the story is not building toward anything new. It is holding on to everything that has already been achieved, allowing it to exist fully without extending beyond its natural limit. And this creates a sense of completion that does not need to be announced, because it is already present within the progression itself. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the narrative maintains its direction without introducing change, allowing every element to remain where it belongs within the same continuous line. And this is what keeps the experience from breaking into separate sections, because it never stops to redefine itself. It simply continues until there is nothing left to carry forward. And that point is reached not through a final event but through the absence of further movement, where everything that needed to happen has already happened, and the story remains as a complete progression. As the flow carries on in the same uninterrupted direction, the story keeps holding on to what has already been established and allows it to continue shaping the present without introducing anything that would shift its course. And this is where the narrative feels steady, because it does not need new conflict to remain active. The impact of earlier moments continues to move through everything that remains, and the environment that once reacted with intensity now holds a calm that feels controlled yet different from the beginning. And this difference is not shown through visible change but through the tone that surrounds each moment, where everything appears settled but still carries the trace of what disrupted it. And as this progression continues, the connection between all phases of the story stays intact. Nothing is separated or left behind. Every element remains part of the same line that has been moving forward from the start. And this is what keeps the experience unified, because even in stillness the narrative continues, not through action but through presence, and remains at the center of this continuity, her journey extending beyond the main events without needing to revisit them, and the way she exists within the space around her reflects everything that has changed without needing expression. And this quiet continuation adds depth because it shows that the story does not end when movement stops. It continues through what remains, and at the same time the consequences of every decision remain embedded within the structure of the narrative, not as something that needs to be explained again but as something that has already defined the path. And this path does not change, it continues forward until it reaches a point where no further direction is needed. And as the story moves closer to that point, the absence of Kong becomes more defined in a subtle but constant way, shaping how the environment feels without drawing attention. Because the space that once carried motion now holds stillness, and that stillness carries meaning that continues influencing the tone. And this is where the film maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active instead of closing it off. And as a result the narrative does not break into an ending, it continues until it naturally settles. And this settling happens gradually, without forcing a conclusion, because every element has already reached its place within the progression. And as the flow continues in this steady manner, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts of the story remains unbroken, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into separate sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it, it relies on the consistency of everything that has already taken place. And as this final movement continues, the story does not attempt to extend beyond what it has already achieved, it allows each moment to remain connected until there is nothing left to carry forward, and this point is reached not through a sudden stop but through a gradual release of progression, where everything has already been resolved through the path it followed. And the narrative remains as a complete and connected line that holds together every element it introduced without losing direction at any stage. As the flow continues without any interruption, the story holds onto the same direction and allows everything that has already happened to remain active within the present. And what becomes clearer is that the narrative is no longer moving toward something new, it is carrying forward the full weight of its journey without breaking its structure. And this is where the experience feels complete while still remaining in motion, because even in the absence of new events, the connection between earlier moments and the current state continues to define everything, and the environment that once reacted with chaos now exists in a controlled calm that feels stable on the surface yet carries a deeper shift beneath it. And this shift is not shown through visible change but through the way the space feels different without needing to explain why. And as the progression continues, the connection between all phases of the story remains unbroken. Nothing is left behind or separated, every part continues to exist within the same line. And this is what keeps the narrative unified, because even when nothing new is introduced the story does not stop, it continues through what has already been built, and remains the center of this continuity, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to revisit it. And the way she exists within the world shows that the experience has carried forward beyond the visible events. And this continuation feels natural because it does not rely on explanation, it exists through the state she carries. And at the same time the consequences of every action remain embedded within the structure, not as something that needs to be restated but as something that has already shaped the direction, and this direction does not change, it continues until it naturally reaches its limit. And as the narrative moves closer to that point, the absence of Kong remains a constant presence that defines the tone without drawing attention, because the space he once filled now carries stillness, and that stillness holds meaning that continues influencing the story. And this is where the film maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active rather than closing it off. And as a result the story does not shift into a separate ending, it continues along the same path until there is nothing left to extend, and this happens gradually, without forcing a final moment, because every element has already reached its place. And as the flow carries forward, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as a single continuous progression from beginning to end without dividing itself into separate sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final scene to define it. It depends on the consistency of its movement, and as this movement continues in the same steady way, the story remains connected without introducing change, holding everything together until the progression naturally comes to rest. As the movement continues without any pause, the story stays locked into the same direction and keeps carrying everything forward in a connected way, and instead of introducing something new, it deepens what is already there by letting earlier moments continue shaping the present. And this is where the experience feels heavier because you are no longer just following events. You are feeling their impact stretching across everything that remains, and the world that once reacted with chaos now appears controlled again, yet that control feels different because it has already been broken once. And even though nothing around has visibly changed, the meaning attached to it has shifted in a way that cannot be reversed, and this difference stays present in a quiet form, not through dramatic actions but through the absence of what used to be there. And as this continuation unfolds, and remains the center of that shift, her journey still moving forward even after everything that happened. And the way she exists now carries a sense of completion that does not need to be explained, because it is already built into the progression of the story, and at the same time the consequences of every choice remain part of the narrative structure, not as something that needs to be repeated but as something that has already defined the path, and that path continues without turning in a new direction, because there is nothing left that needs to change it. And as the flow keeps moving, absence of Kong becomes more defined, not as something that needs to be shown again but as something that shapes the environment by not being there, and this absence carries weight that stays present without drawing attention, influencing how every moment feels even when nothing is happening. And this is where the narrative maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already taken place to remain active instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not shift into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same line until it reaches a natural point where there is no further movement required. And this point is reached gradually through progression, not through interruption, because nothing stops suddenly, everything settles in place over time, and as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts of the story stays strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as a single, continuous progression from beginning to end without dividing itself into parts. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it. It relies on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward, and as this final stretch continues, the story remains focused on holding together everything it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to stay connected until the progression naturally reaches its limit without breaking its flow or losing its direction at any stage. As the flow continues forward without any interruption, the narrative remains tied to the same direction it has carried from the beginning, and instead of introducing anything new, it keeps expanding the weight of what has already taken place, allowing each moment to feel connected to everything that came before it. And this is where the experience becomes more about presence than action, because the story no longer depends on events to move ahead. It depends on how those events continue to exist within the world and within the characters, and the environment that once reacted with intensity now settles into a controlled calm, yet that calm carries a subtle shift that makes it feel different from the start. And this difference does not need explanation, it is understood through contrast, through the way spaces feel quieter, through the way movement has slowed, through the way absence has replaced presence. And as this continuation unfolds, and remains at the center of that change, her journey still moving forward even without visible conflict. And the way she exists now reflects everything she has experienced, not through expression but through stillness, allowing the viewer to understand that her story has not ended, it has simply moved into a different state. And at the same time, the consequences of every action remain part of the structure, not as something that needs to be restated but as something that has already shaped the direction, and that direction does not shift. It continues forward until it naturally reaches its limit. and as the narrative progresses, the absence of Kong becomes a defining part of the tone, shaping how every moment feels without needing to draw attention to it, because the space he once filled now holds stillness. And that stillness carries meaning that continues influencing the story, and this is where the film maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active rather than closing it off. And as a result, the narrative does not separate itself into an ending, it continues along the same line until there is nothing left to extend, and this point is reached gradually, through progression rather than interruption, because nothing changes suddenly, everything settles into place over time, and as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections, and this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it, it relies on the consistency of its progression, and as this movement continues in the same steady way, the story holds together everything it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected. As the movement continues without pause, the narrative keeps its direction steady and begins to circle back through memory in a natural way, not by replaying events but by letting their impact surface through small, quiet moments that feel connected to what came before, and you start to sense how the early parts of the journey still echo within the present, especially in how Anne carries herself through spaces that once felt ordinary, because those same spaces now hold a different meaning shaped by everything she has seen, and this shift does not need to be explained through dialogue, it becomes clear through the way she pauses, through the way she looks at familiar surroundings with a distance that was not there before, and this quiet change adds depth to the story because it shows that the journey continues internally even when external movement has slowed. And at the same time, the narrative keeps its connection intact by allowing earlier themes to remain active without repeating them directly, and you can feel how the idea of control and consequence still exists within the background, not as something being discussed but as something already proven through what has taken place. And as the flow continues, the absence of Kong remains a constant influence, shaping the atmosphere in a subtle but steady way, because the energy that once filled the environment is no longer there, and that difference becomes more noticeable the longer the story stays in this calm state, and instead of fading away, that absence continues to define the tone, reminding you of everything that led to this point without needing to show it again, and this is where the narrative maintains its strength, by keeping all elements connected through progression rather than separation, and as a result the story does not feel like it has moved into a new phase, it feels like it has extended the same line until it has naturally reached a point of stillness, and this stillness is not empty, it is filled with everything that has already happened, and that is what keeps the experience engaging even without visible action, and as the progression continues, the structure remains unchanged, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between every moment stays strong, allowing the entire journey to exist as one continuous movement that does not break or reset. And this continuity is what makes the narrative feel complete without needing a defined ending, because everything that needed to happen has already taken place, and the story simply carries that forward until there is nothing left to extend, and as this final stretch continues, the flow remains smooth, the direction remains clear, and the entire experience stays connected from beginning to end without losing its sense of movement or its emotional line at any point. As the flow continues without any break, the narrative holds the same direction and begins to settle into a state where everything that has already happened keeps shaping how the present feels. And this is where the experience becomes more about continuity than progression, because there is no need to introduce new conflict or shift the path. The story simply carries forward the full weight of its journey, and the world that once reacted with intensity now feels controlled again, yet that control carries a subtle difference that cannot be ignored, because it has already been challenged, and even though everything looks stable on the surface, there is a quiet understanding beneath it that something irreversible has taken place, and this understanding remains present without needing to be shown directly, and as the narrative continues, Anne stays at the center of this shift, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to revisit any part of it, and the way she exists now shows that her story has not stopped. It has moved into a phase where the impact defines her more than the events themselves, and this continuation feels natural because it does not rely on explanation, it exists through stillness and presence, allowing the viewer to remain connected without needing additional scenes, and at the same time the consequences of every action remain embedded within the structure of the story, not as something that needs to be restated but as something that has already shaped the direction completely, and that direction continues without change because there is nothing left that can alter it, and as the flow carries forward, the absence of Kong continues shaping the environment in a subtle but constant way, not through reminders but through the way everything feels without him, and this absence becomes a defining part of the tone, influencing each moment without drawing attention, and this is where the narrative maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already taken place to remain active within the present, and as a result the story does not shift into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same line until it naturally reaches a point where there is nothing left to extend, and this point forms gradually through progression rather than interruption, because nothing stops suddenly, everything settles into place over time, and as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts of the narrative stays strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections, and this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it, it relies on the consistency of its progression, and as the movement continues in the same steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression naturally reaches its limit without breaking its flow or losing its direction at any stage. As the flow keeps moving in the same uninterrupted direction, the story begins to reconnect with earlier moments in a subtle way, not by showing them again but by letting their presence remain within the current state. And this is where the experience starts to feel layered because what you are seeing now is shaped by everything that has already taken place. And the environment that appears stable on the surface carries a deeper shift that continues to influence how each moment feels. And this shift is not presented through visible change but through tone, through the quiet space left behind, through the absence that has replaced movement, and as this continuation unfolds, and remains the central point of connection, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to revisit it, and the way she exists now shows that the experience has carried forward beyond the visible events, and this continuation does not rely on expression, it is understood through stillness, through the way she holds onto what has already happened without needing to show it again, and at the same time the consequences of every decision remain part of the structure, not as something that needs to be explained but as something that has already defined the direction completely, and that direction does not change, it continues until it naturally reaches a point where nothing else needs to be added, and as the narrative progresses, the absence of Kong continues shaping the atmosphere in a subtle but constant way, because the space he once filled now carries stillness, and that stillness holds meaning that continues influencing the tone, and this is where the story maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result the narrative does not move into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same line until it naturally settles, and this settling happens gradually, through progression rather than interruption, because nothing shifts suddenly, everything comes into place over time, and as this process continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into separate sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it. It depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward, and as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression naturally reaches its limit without breaking its flow or losing its direction at any stage. As everything moves forward without stopping, the story begins to feel more settled, not because it has slowed down, but because it has reached a point where nothing new needs to be introduced, and this is where the experience shifts from movement to impact, where what has already happened continues to shape every moment that follows. and the city that once reacted with fear now carries a calm surface that hides the change underneath. Because even though life continues as before, the meaning behind it is no longer the same, and this difference becomes clear through the way space feels quieter, less active, and more distant than it was at the beginning, and remains at the center of this shift, not through action but through presence, as her journey continues in a way that shows she is no longer the same person who started it. And this change is not spoken or explained. It is understood through the way she exists in familiar surroundings with a new sense of awareness, and at the same time the result of every decision made earlier continues to hold its place in the story, not as a reminder but as a completed path that cannot be altered. And this path keeps moving forward without changing direction because there is nothing left that can shift it. And as the progression continues, the absence of Kong becomes more noticeable in a subtle but constant way, because the space he once filled now feels empty. And that emptiness carries weight without needing to be shown again, influencing how everything feels without drawing attention to itself. And this is where the narrative keeps its connection strong, by allowing everything that has already taken place to remain part of the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not jump into a separate ending, it continues along the same line until it reaches a natural point where no further movement is required. And this point is not created suddenly, it forms gradually as each moment settles into place. And as this process continues, the structure remains stable, the tone stays consistent, and the connection between all parts remains intact, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous journey from start to finish without dividing itself into parts. And this continuity is what gives the narrative its completeness, because it does not rely on a final scene to define it. It relies on the consistency of everything that has already been carried forward. And as the movement reaches its natural limit, the story remains connected without adding anything unnecessary, holding together every element it introduced without breaking its flow or losing its direction at any stage. As the flow keeps moving ahead without any pause, the story holds onto everything it has built and allows it to stay present instead of fading away. And this is where the experience feels more grounded because it no longer depends on action to stay alive. It depends on the lasting effect of what has already taken place, and the surroundings that once felt unstable now appear steady again. Yet that steadiness carries a quiet difference that changes how everything is perceived, because even though life continues as it did before, there is a clear sense that something has shifted beneath the surface. And this shift is not shown through dramatic scenes but through the way the environment feels less vibrant, less active, and more distant than it was earlier, and remains the key connection to that change, not by doing anything new but by simply existing within the same world in a different way. And her presence reflects a journey that has already reached its full weight, and this reflection does not need to be explained. It is understood through stillness, through the absence of reaction, through the way she carries forward everything she has experienced without needing to revisit it. And at the same time, the consequences of earlier decisions continue to exist within the structure of the story, not as reminders but as outcomes that have already shaped the path completely. And this path moves forward without turning because there is nothing left that can change it. And as the narrative continues, the absence of Kong becomes more defined in how it shapes the space around it, because the energy that once filled the environment is no longer there, and that missing presence creates a sense of emptiness that remains constant without needing to be shown again. And this is what keeps the tone connected, because the story does not try to replace what has been lost. It allows that loss to remain part of the experience, and as a result the narrative does not separate into a new phase. It continues along the same direction until it naturally reaches a point where no further movement is needed, and this point forms slowly, through progression rather than interruption, because nothing ends suddenly, everything settles into place over time, and as this settling continues, the structure remains firm, the tone stays aligned, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it, it depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward, and as the movement reaches its natural limit, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression comes to rest without breaking its flow or losing its direction. At any stage, as the movement continues in the same uninterrupted direction, the narrative stays focused on carrying forward the effect of everything that has already taken place, and you begin to feel that the story is no longer trying to expand, it is allowing its full weight to exist within the present without adding anything new. And this is where the experience becomes more about how things feel rather than what is happening, because the events have already shaped the outcome and now that outcome is simply settling into place, and the world that once reacted with urgency now appears calm again. Yet that calm carries a quiet difference that changes how everything is experienced, because even though the surface looks the same, there is a deeper understanding beneath it that remains active. And this understanding is not shown through action, it exists through tone, through stillness, through the absence of movement that once defined the space. And as this continuation unfolds, and remains the strongest connection to that shift, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to revisit it, and the way she exists now shows that her story has not stopped. It has moved into a state where the impact defines her more than the events themselves. And this continuation feels natural because it does not rely on explanation, it is carried through presence alone. And at the same time, the consequences of every decision remain embedded within the structure of the narrative, not as something that needs to be restated, but as something that has already shaped the direction completely, and that direction continues forward without change because there is nothing left that can alter it. And as the flow carries on, the absence of Kong continues shaping the environment in a subtle but constant way, because the space he once filled now holds stillness, and that stillness carries meaning that continues influencing how every moment feels. And this is where the narrative maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not move into a separate ending, it continues along the same line until it naturally reaches a point where no further movement is required. And this point forms gradually through progression, because nothing stops suddenly, everything settles into place over time. And as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it. It depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement reaches its natural limit, the story holds together every element it introduced, without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression comes to rest without breaking its flow or losing its direction at any stage. As the narrative continues moving in the same uninterrupted direction, the focus naturally returns to the earlier phases of the journey in a way that feels connected rather than separate, and this is where the story begins to revisit its own path without repeating itself. Because instead of showing past events again, it allows their influence to remain active within the present. And you start to feel how everything that happened from the very beginning still exists in a subtle form, shaping how the current state feels. And this creates a sense of continuity where nothing is lost or forgotten, every part remains connected within the same line. And as this progression unfolds, the early struggle of survival that defined Anne's life at the start gains new meaning, because what once felt like desperation now feels distant, replaced by an experience that has reshaped her understanding of everything around her. And this shift is not shown through explanation, it is carried through presence, through the way she interacts with her surroundings without the same urgency she once had. And this quiet change reflects how far the journey has taken her without needing to state it directly, and at the same time the story keeps its connection strong by allowing the environment to mirror that shift, because the city that once felt like a place of constant pressure now feels structured and stable. Yet that stability carries a subtle emptiness that was not there before, and this emptiness does not come from what is present but from what is missing. And as this absence continues to shape the tone, it becomes clear that Kong's role in the story has not ended with his fall. His presence continues through the space he once occupied, influencing how everything feels even without being shown again. And this is where the narrative maintains its depth, by allowing what has been lost to remain active within the experience instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not need to introduce new conflict to stay engaging, it remains focused on the connection between what has already taken place and how it continues to exist. And as the flow moves forward, the earlier tension between control and understanding becomes clearer in hindsight, because every moment that involved trying to contain Kong now feels connected to the outcome that followed. And this connection does not need to be explained. It is already built into the progression of the story, and as this realization settles, the narrative continues carrying that meaning forward without interruption, allowing each moment to remain tied to the larger path, and at the same time the structure of the story stays intact, not shifting into a separate conclusion but continuing along the same direction until it naturally reaches a point where nothing more needs to be added, and this point forms gradually as each element settles into place. Because nothing ends suddenly, everything transitions into stillness through progression, and as this settling continues, the emotional thread remains connected, the tone stays consistent, and the flow remains smooth, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement without breaking into parts. And this continuity is what gives the narrative its strength, because it does not depend on isolated moments to create impact. It depends on the connection between all moments to carry meaning, and as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together everything it introduced from the beginning, allowing each element to remain connected until the progression reaches its natural limit. As the story continues moving ahead, the focus gradually shifts back toward the journey itself, not by showing past scenes again but by letting their effect stay present in everything that follows. And you start to feel how the beginning of the film connects directly to where things have reached now, because the struggle that once defined Anne's life at the start no longer feels the same after everything she has gone through, and this change becomes visible in the way she carries herself through the same kind of environment that once felt overwhelming, where survival used to be the only concern, but now there is a sense of distance from that urgency, as if the experience has reshaped what matters and what does not. And at the same time the story keeps its connection strong by allowing the environment to reflect that shift, because the city appears stable and organized, yet there is a quiet emptiness that was not noticeable before, and this emptiness comes from the absence of something that once disrupted everything, and as that absence continues to shape the tone, it becomes clear that Kong's presence has not disappeared completely, it has transformed into something that exists through memory and impact rather than action, and this is what keeps the narrative grounded, because it does not try to replace what has been lost, it allows that loss to remain part of the experience, and as the progression moves forward, the earlier tension between control and understanding becomes easier to recognize, because every attempt to dominate or contain led directly to what followed. And this connection feels natural because it has been built step by step without forcing any explanation, and as this realization settles into the flow, the narrative continues in the same direction without introducing anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected to the larger path. And at the same time the characters continue existing within this space in a way that feels consistent with everything they have experienced, because nothing resets or returns to how it was before, everything carries forward in a changed state, and this continuity is what keeps the story from feeling divided, because there is no clear separation between what happened and what follows. It all exists as part of the same movement, and as this movement continues, the tone remains steady, the direction remains clear, and the connection between every part of the journey stays intact, allowing the experience to feel complete through progression rather than through a forced conclusion. As the story continues in the same uninterrupted direction, the focus shifts naturally toward how everything that happened earlier continues shaping the present without needing to be shown again, and you begin to feel that the journey has reached a point where each moment carries its own weight without relying on new events to move forward, because the impact of what has already taken place is still active. And this creates a sense of continuity where nothing feels separate, every part remains connected within the same line. And as this progression unfolds, the early phase where Anne struggled just to survive starts to feel distant, not because it is forgotten but because it has been transformed by everything that followed. And this transformation becomes visible in how she now moves through familiar surroundings with a different sense of awareness, no longer reacting to the world in the same way. And this quiet change reflects the depth of her journey without needing to explain it. And at the same time the environment continues to mirror this shift, because the city that once felt intense and demanding now appears calm and structured, yet that calm carries a subtle emptiness that was not noticeable before, and this emptiness comes from the absence of something that once disrupted everything. And as this absence continues to influence the tone, it becomes clear that Kong's presence still exists in a different form, not through action but through the impact he left behind. And this is what keeps the narrative grounded, because it does not try to replace what has been lost. It allows that absence to remain part of the experience, and as the flow moves forward, the earlier tension between control and understanding becomes easier to recognize, because every moment that involved trying to dominate led directly to what followed, and this connection does not need to be stated. It is already built into the progression, and as this understanding settles, the narrative continues along the same direction without introducing anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected to the larger path. And at the same time the characters continue existing within this space in a way that feels consistent with everything they have experienced, because nothing resets, everything carries forward in a changed state, and this continuity keeps the story unified, because there is no clear separation between what happened and what continues. It all exists within the same movement, and as this movement carries on, the tone remains stable, the direction remains clear, and the connection between all parts stays intact, allowing the experience to feel complete through progression rather than through a forced ending. And this is what keeps the narrative strong, because it relies on the consistency of its journey rather than on a single final moment to define it. As the movement carries on in the same continuous direction, the story begins to draw attention to how the smallest details now hold more meaning than before, because the major events have already shaped the path, and what remains is how those events continue to influence everything that follows. And you start to notice that even simple moments carry a different weight, not because they are dramatic but because they exist after everything has changed, and this shift becomes clear through the way familiar surroundings feel quieter and more distant than they once did, and this change does not need to be explained. It is understood through contrast, through the difference between how things felt at the beginning and how they feel now, and remains the central point of that contrast, her presence reflecting a journey that has moved far beyond its starting point, and the way she exists within the same environment shows that her understanding has deepened without needing to express it directly, and this quiet transformation adds depth because it shows that the story has not ended, it has simply reached a stage where its impact continues without needing action, and at the same time the connection between earlier decisions and their outcomes remains clear, because everything that took place followed a consistent path, and this path does not change. It continues forward without turning because there is nothing left that can alter it, and as the narrative continues, the absence of Kong remains a constant influence that shapes how everything feels, because the energy he brought to the story has not been replaced, it has been removed, and that removal creates a space that carries its own presence, affecting the tone without needing to draw attention to it. And this is where the story maintains its continuity, by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the narrative does not separate into a distinct ending phase. It continues along the same line until it gradually settles. And this settling does not happen suddenly, it forms over time as each element reaches its place, and as this process continues, the structure remains stable, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts stays strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous journey from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what gives the narrative its strength, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it, it relies on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression naturally comes to rest in a way that feels complete through its own continuity. As the flow keeps moving forward without any interruption, the story begins to shift its focus toward how the journey feels when everything that needed to happen has already taken place, and this is where the experience becomes more internal than external, because the events no longer drive the narrative, the impact of those events does, and you start noticing that the world continues as it always did, yet it no longer feels the same because the meaning attached to it has changed, and this Difference is not shown through obvious changes, it exists in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space that now feels less filled than before, and as this progression continues, and remains the strongest connection to everything that has happened, her presence carrying the entire journey without needing to return to it, and the way she exists now shows that her story has moved beyond action into a state where the experience itself defines her, and this continuation feels natural because it does not rely on explanation, it is understood through how she carries forward what she has gone through, and at the same time the link between every decision and its outcome remains clear, because nothing that happened was without direction, every step led to the next, and that path has now reached a point where it no longer needs to change. And as the narrative carries on, the absence of Kong continues shaping the environment in a subtle way, because what he represented has not been replaced. It has been removed, and that absence creates a presence of its own that influences how everything feels without needing to be shown again. And this is where the story maintains its continuity, by allowing everything that has already taken place to remain active instead of closing it off. And as a result, the narrative does not divide into a separate ending. It continues along the same line until it gradually settles into a state where nothing more needs to be added, and this settling happens over time, without any sudden shift, as each element reaches its place within the progression, and as this process continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains steady, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not rely on a final moment to define it, it relies on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression comes to rest in a way that feels complete through its own continuity. As the movement continues in the same uninterrupted direction, the narrative gradually shifts toward how the entire journey fits together as one connected path rather than a series of separate moments. And this is where you begin to feel that everything from the beginning still exists within the present, shaping how each moment is understood without needing to be shown again. And the early struggle that once defined Anne's life now feels distant but not disconnected, because it has been transformed by everything she experienced afterward, and this transformation becomes visible in how she now exists within the same kind of environment that once felt overwhelming, where the urgency that once guided her actions has been replaced by a quieter awareness that does not need to react in the same way. And this change adds depth because it shows that the journey has extended beyond its visible events into a lasting impact, and at the same time the environment continues to reflect this shift, because the city that once felt intense now appears stable and structured, yet there is a subtle emptiness within that stability that was not noticeable before, and this emptiness comes from the absence of something that once disrupted everything. And as that absence continues shaping the tone, it becomes clear that Kong's presence has not completely disappeared, it remains through the effect he left behind, influencing how everything feels even without being shown again. And this is what keeps the narrative grounded, because it does not attempt to replace what has been lost, it allows that loss to remain part of the experience. And as the progression carries forward, the earlier tension between control and understanding becomes easier to recognize, because every moment that involved trying to dominate led directly to the outcome that followed. And this connection is already built into the flow, making it feel natural rather than explained. And as this realization settles into the story, the narrative continues along the same direction without introducing anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected to the larger path. And at the same time the characters continue existing within this space in a way that feels consistent with everything they have experienced, because nothing resets, everything carries forward in a changed state, and this continuity keeps the story unified, because there is no clear separation between what happened and what continues, it all exists within the same movement, and as this movement carries on, the tone remains steady, the direction remains clear, and the connection between all parts stays intact, allowing the experience to feel complete through progression rather than through a forced ending. And this is what gives the narrative its strength, because it relies on the consistency of its journey rather than on a single final moment to define it. As the story continues to move forward without any break, it slowly brings attention back to the full journey that led to this point, not by repeating events but by letting their impact stay present in every moment that follows. And you begin to feel how everything from the beginning still connects to what is happening now, because the struggle that once defined Anne's life has been completely reshaped by everything she experienced afterward. And this shift becomes visible in the way she now moves through the same kind of surroundings that once felt overwhelming, where survival used to guide every action, but now there is a different kind of awareness that does not rely on urgency, and this quiet change reflects the depth of the journey without needing to be explained. And at the same time, the environment mirrors that transformation, because the city that once felt intense now appears stable and organized. Yet there is a subtle emptiness within that stability that was not noticeable before, and this emptiness comes from the absence of something that once disrupted everything. And as this absence continues shaping the tone, it becomes clear that Kong's presence has not completely disappeared. It still exists through the effect he left behind, influencing how everything feels even without being shown again. And this is what keeps the narrative grounded, because it does not try to replace what has been lost. It allows that loss to remain part of the experience. And as the flow continues, the earlier tension between control and understanding becomes easier to recognize, because every attempt to dominate or contain led directly to the outcome that followed. And this connection feels natural because it has been built step by step throughout the story. And as this realization settles, the narrative continues along the same direction without introducing anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected to the larger path. And at the same time, the characters continue existing within this space in a way that feels consistent with everything they have experienced, because nothing resets, everything carries forward in a changed state. And this continuity keeps the story unified, because there is no clear separation between what happened and what continues. It all exists within the same movement, and as this movement carries on, the tone remains steady, the direction remains clear, and the connection between all parts stays intact, allowing the experience to feel complete through progression rather than through a forced ending. And this is what gives the narrative its strength, because it relies on the consistency of its journey rather than on a single final moment to define it. As the narrative keeps moving forward in the same uninterrupted line, the focus settles on how the journey reshapes everything it touches, and you start to feel that nothing in this world exists in the same way it did before, because every place, every moment, and every character now carries a trace of what happened, and this trace becomes more noticeable the longer the story stays in this calm state, where there is no immediate danger or urgency, yet the absence of that urgency does not remove the weight that has been built. It only makes it clearer. And as this continuation unfolds and remains the strongest connection to that weight, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to return to it, and the way she moves through her surroundings shows that her understanding has changed in a way that cannot be undone, because what she experienced has replaced the perspective she once had. And this transformation does not need to be explained through words. It exists through how she carries herself, through how she observes rather than reacts. And this subtle shift adds depth to the story because it shows that the journey continues internally even when nothing new is happening externally. And at the same time, the environment continues to reflect this change, because the city now feels quieter and more distant than it did at the beginning, not because it has physically changed, but because its meaning has been altered by everything that took place. And this difference becomes a constant presence in the narrative, shaping how each moment feels without needing to draw attention to itself. And as the progression continues, the absence of Kong remains a defining element that influences the tone in a quiet but steady way. Because what he represented has not been replaced, it has simply been removed, and that removal creates a space that carries its own presence, affecting the experience without needing to be shown again. And this is where the narrative maintains its continuity by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not move into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same direction until it gradually settles into a point where nothing more needs to be added. And this point forms naturally through progression, because every element has already reached its place within the story. And as this settling continues, the structure remains stable, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it. It depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element. It introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression reaches a state where it naturally comes to rest through its own flow. As the flow keeps moving ahead without interruption, the story stays connected to everything it has already built and begins to bring the full journey into one clear line, where each moment feels tied to the one before it without any gap. And you start noticing that even though nothing new is being introduced, the narrative still feels active because the impact of earlier events continues shaping how everything is experienced now. And this is where the experience becomes more about how things have changed rather than what is happening, because the change itself carries the movement forward, and the world that once reacted with urgency now feels settled. Yet that settled state holds a quiet difference that makes it feel unfamiliar despite looking the same. And this difference becomes clearer through the way space feels less filled, less intense, and more distant than it was before. And as this continuation unfolds, and remains the strongest link to everything that has taken place, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to return to it, and the way she exists now shows that her understanding has shifted in a way that cannot be reversed, because what she experienced has become part of how she sees everything around her. And this transformation does not need explanation. It is carried through stillness, through the way she observes instead of reacts. And this adds depth because it shows that the story continues even when action has stopped, and at the same time the consequences of every decision remain part of the structure, not as something that needs to be restated but as something that has already defined the path completely, and that path continues forward without turning because there is nothing left that can change it. And as the narrative continues, the absence of Kong remains a constant influence that shapes the tone in a subtle but steady way, because what he represented has not been replaced, it has been removed, and that removal creates a space that carries meaning on its own, affecting how each moment feels without needing to be shown again. And this is where the story maintains its continuity, by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the narrative does not move into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same direction until it gradually settles into a point where nothing more needs to be added, and this point forms through progression, not through sudden change, because everything reaches its place over time. And as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it. It depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression naturally comes to rest through its own flow. As the flow continues without any interruption, the story begins to reconnect with its earliest moments in a way that feels natural, not by going back but by allowing those moments to remain present in how everything is understood now. And you start to sense that the entire journey has come full circle in terms of meaning, because what once felt like a simple struggle for survival has turned into something far deeper. And this depth becomes visible in how it now moves through the same kind of world that once felt overwhelming, where urgency used to define every action, but now there is a quiet awareness that replaces that urgency. And this change is not spoken, it is felt through presence, through stillness, through the way she observes instead of reacting. And this adds a layer to the story that continues even without visible events. And at the same time the environment mirrors the shift, because the city now feels structured and calm, yet there is a subtle emptiness within that calm that was not noticeable before, and this emptiness comes from the absence of something that once disrupted everything. And as that absence continues shaping the tone, it becomes clear that Kong's presence has not completely disappeared, it remains through the impact he left behind, influencing how everything feels even without being shown again. and this is what keeps the narrative grounded, because it does not try to replace what has been lost. It allows that absence to remain part of the experience, and as the progression carries forward, the earlier conflict between control and understanding becomes clearer, because every attempt to dominate led directly to what followed, and this connection has already been built into the flow, making it feel natural rather than explained. And as this realization settles, the narrative continues along the same direction without introducing anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected to the larger path, and at the same time, the characters continue existing within this space in a way that feels consistent with everything they have experienced, because nothing resets, everything carries forward in a changed state, and this continuity keeps the story unified, because there is no clear separation between what happened and what continues. It all exists within the same movement, and as this movement carries on, the tone remains steady, the direction remains clear, and the connection between all parts stays intact, allowing the experience to feel complete through progression rather than through a forced ending. And this is what gives the narrative its strength, because it relies on the consistency of its journey rather than on a single final moment to define it. As the story keeps moving forward without any interruption, it begins to bring everything it has built into a single connected understanding, where each part of the journey feels linked without needing to be shown again, and you start to realize that the beginning, the middle, and what follows all exist within the same line, not as separate phases but as one continuous path. And this is where the experience feels complete in a deeper way, because nothing has been left behind or forgotten. Everything still exists within the present, shaping how each moment is felt, and the world that once reacted with intensity now appears calm and structured, yet that calm holds a quiet difference that changes how everything is perceived, because even though nothing looks different on the surface, the meaning attached to it has shifted, and this shift is not presented through action, it is carried through tone, through stillness, through the absence of what once filled the space. And as this continuation unfolds, and remains the strongest connection to that shift, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to return to it, and the way she exists now shows that her understanding has changed in a way that cannot be undone, because what she experienced has become part of how she sees everything around her, and this transformation does not need explanation. It is understood through how she carries herself, through how she observes rather than reacts, and this adds depth, because it shows that the story continues even when visible movement has slowed, and at the same time the consequences of every action remain embedded within the structure of the narrative, not as something that needs to be restated but as something that has already shaped the direction completely, and that direction continues forward without change because there is nothing left that can alter it. And as the narrative continues, the absence of Kong remains a constant influence that shapes the tone in a subtle but steady way. Because what he represented has not been replaced, it has been removed, and that removal creates a space that carries meaning on its own, affecting how each moment feels without needing to be shown again. And this is where the story maintains its continuity, by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the narrative does not move into a separate ending phase. It continues along the same direction until it gradually settles into a point where nothing more needs to be added. And this point forms through progression, not through sudden change, because everything reaches its place over time, and as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it. It depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression settles into a complete and unified state. As the flow continues in the same uninterrupted direction, the story settles into a state where everything that has already happened keeps shaping how the present feels, and you begin to notice that even without new events the narrative still holds attention because the journey has already created a lasting effect that does not fade. And this is where the experience becomes more about what remains rather than what is happening, because the impact now carries the movement instead of action. And The world that once reacted with urgency now appears calm and organized, yet that calm feels different because it has already been broken once. And even though everything looks stable again, there is a quiet understanding beneath it that cannot be ignored. And this understanding is not shown directly, it exists in the stillness, in the absence of what once filled the space. And as this continuation unfolds, and remains the center of that change, her presence reflecting everything she has been through without needing to revisit any part of it, and the way she exists now shows that her journey has not stopped. It has simply moved into a phase where the experience defines her more than the events themselves. And this shift is not explained, it is felt through how she carries herself, through how she observes instead of reacting, and this adds depth because it shows that the story continues even without visible movement, and at the same time the consequences of every decision remain part of the structure, not as something that needs to be restated but as something that has already shaped the direction completely, and that direction does not change, it continues forward without turning because there is nothing left that can alter it. And as the narrative carries on, the absence of Kong continues shaping the environment in a subtle but steady way, because what he represented has not been replaced, it has simply been removed, and that removal creates a presence of its own that influences how everything feels without needing to be shown again. And this is where the story maintains its continuity, by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the narrative does not move into a separate ending phase, it continues along the same direction until it gradually settles into a point where nothing more needs to be added. And this point forms naturally through progression, because every element has already reached its place, and as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into sections. And this continuity is what keeps the narrative complete, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it, it depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced without adding anything unnecessary, allowing each moment to remain connected until the progression comes to rest in a way that feels complete through its own continuity. As the story moves into its final stretch, the entire journey begins to settle into a state where everything that has happened continues to exist within the present without needing to be shown again, and you start to feel that nothing is missing because every part of the path has already played its role in shaping what now remains. And this is where the experience becomes fully grounded, not through action but through the weight of everything that has already taken place, and the world that once reacted with chaos now stands completely still, carrying a sense of order that feels stable on the surface yet deeply changed underneath. Because even though life continues as before, the meaning behind it is no longer the same, and this difference becomes clear in the quiet, in the empty spaces, in the absence of movement that once defined everything, and remains at the center of this transformation, her presence reflecting the entire journey without needing to revisit it, and the way she moves through familiar surroundings shows that she is no longer connected to them in the same way, because what she experienced has reshaped her understanding of everything around her, and this shift is not spoken, it is carried through how she observes, through how she exists within the space without reacting to it as she once did. And this adds depth to the story because it shows that the journey has extended beyond visible events into something that continues internally, and at the same time the consequences of every decision remain embedded within the structure of the narrative, not as something that needs to be explained but as something that has already defined the path completely, and that path has now reached a point where it cannot change, because every step has already led to where things stand now. And as the flow continues, the absence of Kong becomes more powerful in how it shapes the environment, because the energy he brought into the story has not been replaced, it has simply been removed, and that removal creates a presence of its own, affecting how everything feels without needing to be shown again. And this is where the narrative holds its continuity, by allowing everything that has already happened to remain active within the present instead of closing it off. And as a result, the story does not shift into a separate ending. It continues along the same direction until it gradually reaches a state where nothing more needs to be added. And this state forms slowly through progression, Because nothing stops suddenly, everything settles into place over time. And as this settling continues, the structure remains intact, the tone remains consistent, and the connection between all parts remains strong, allowing the entire experience to exist as one continuous movement from beginning to end without dividing itself into separate sections. And this continuity is what gives the narrative its sense of completion, because it does not depend on a final moment to define it, it depends on the consistency of everything that has been carried forward. And as the movement continues in this steady way, the story holds together every element it introduced, allowing each moment to remain connected without interruption. And this is what makes the ending feel complete without needing anything more, because the journey has already delivered everything it needed to. And what remains is not a conclusion but a quiet realization that everything has reached its place through the path it followed, leaving behind a connected experience that feels whole, resolved, and fully carried from its beginning to its final state.